Hey YouTube, how's it going? Today I have a deck profile for you guys. Just this last weekend, went to the Winnipeg Regionals and I ended up going top 8 with, as the title says, Swordsoul. So I personally think that this deck is not the best deck in the format, but it was the deck that I was most comfortable with, and it was a toss-up between this or the best deck being Despia. And ultimately I thought that I could outplay the mirror match, and I think this deck matches up pretty decently against Despia, so I gave it a go, and lo and behold I think I did pretty okay. So I'll go through the deck profile, and afterwards I'll go through the matchups and how each matchup went through and how I decided to play through specific boards or specific hands, and we'll go from there. Alright, so we'll start with the main deck first. So the lineups I have are pretty standard for the most part. I have 3 Ecclesia. I was playing in 2 initially. The deck count itself is 44, but when I was playing a hard 40, I opted to go with only 2 Ecclesia just because the ratios and the math that it worked out. Starting, I would see about 80% of a starter, whether it be a Tenyi plus a Swordsoul, or 2 Swordsouls, or 2 Tenyis. It worked out perfectly in my favor, but when I bumped the number up to what it is now, which is 44, 3 Ecclesias just made sense. Next, we have 3 Moyu. There's no explanation for this. You have to kind of play 3. It's the best +1 in the deck when you're synchroing off. Just great overall. Next we have 3 Long One. Again, probably your best extender, definitely your best Swordsoul extender, and definitely allows you to go for those synchro 10 plays and other funky plays that can get you out of some pretty tough situations that we'll go over in a little bit. And lastly, we have the 2 Taye. Last format, when Hulk was a thing and Desires was at 1, we opted to play 1. However, with Desires at 2, my luck being god awful, 2 just makes sense. And again, with the starters ratio with Ecclesia, 2 just makes sense in this format. So we opted to go for 2 of that. So obviously that's all the Swordsouls and the honorary Swordsoul. The Tenyi lineup goes as follows. We have 3 Ashuna, your best Tenyi by far, best extender in forms of Tenyi. We have 3 Vishuddha. This card is just way too good going second to opt to play anything less than 3. I understand the mindset behind playing 2. You don't really necessarily want to see it going first, but at the same time you do, right? In my build, I run Heavenly Dragon Circle and Heavenly Dragon Circle, yeah, and Vessel for the Dragon Cycle. So those 2 cards work very well in tandem with any Tenyi, so regardless of what Tenyi you draw, if it's not a Shuna, this can still get you into a play. So I opted for that, and that's the reasoning behind 3. And 3 Adhar as well. Some people opt to play 2 of these, but again, with the same logic with Vishuddha, I kind of do want to see the Tenyi no matter what. So I don't necessarily mind seeing this, because it enables not only, let's say, a Swordsoul, but it also enables the other 2 Tenyi spell cards as well. And I also play the 1 Shithana. This card, can't lie, sometimes it's kind of bad to draw. You don't necessarily want to draw it, but sometimes when you do see it, it is really good. And it kind of came up 3 times today where it actually helped me go for game, and we'll go into those situations afterwards. So those are the Tenyi monster lineups. Now for the hand trap lineup, I'm going to jump through around the deck for that. 3 Ash Blossom, best hand trap of the format. Kills Despia if they don't have the extender past the Branded Fusion. Usually I would save it for that. Yeah, there's not much more to say. It's just super versatile as well. 3 Effect Builder. This one was a bit iffy for me. It was either this or DD Crow, and unfortunately I opted for this aside from DD Crow. The reason why I say unfortunately is because when I did see this, I was envisioning what would happen if I saw DD Crow instead, and when I envisioned it, DD Crow got me out of a lot more situations than that of Effect Veiler. It's great against Rogue, against things you don't anticipate. However, against Despia, you can hit the Eluger, but I'd much rather have it for much rather have Crow waiting for the branded red, targeting whatever they want. They want to target Engrave. I did miss Crow today. It's not in the side either, and I wish I did have it. But regardless, let bygones be bygones. All right, and we also play 3 Imperm. I think second best hand trap in the format, obviously behind Ash Blossom. This card's so versatile. I was fearing the Flunder matchup in regards to just not being able to play, not necessarily the deck power itself. So Imperm was a card that I 100% needed. If they went with if I played against a Flunder, which I didn't, but if I did, and they opted for a board where they start with Wind Barrier on field, I would just ordinarily save this in my hand if I acknowledged they were going for that play. But if they didn't, I would just try to hit like the Eaglin or something. Yeah, so that's the hand trap lineup, 9 there. Now we're going with the spells. For the Swordsoul spells, 3 emergence, no explanation needed. It's your Rhoda for your deck. If you have a Worm Synchro in the field, you can just search a Worm instead as well. Pretty cool. And as I mentioned, I played 2 and 2. The reasoning behind this is, well, originally I was playing 3 and 2, but the reasoning behind this lineup specifically is because I don't necessarily want to see these in multiples. I would like to see either or, right? This card is absolutely bonkers going first. It enables your Chowfing play if you're going for the mirror match. And going second, it's pretty good as well. If they don't stop it, it gives you so much advantage and it forces the hand of the opponent. This guy here, a very good going first and second. Obviously, the generic application for this is sending your Moi or Taio away, grabbing Shithana so your play still goes through. Sure, it's an egg 1, but it allows you to keep playing. The more important use of this card, I think, is when you're going second. Say you're summoning, you have a shoot in hand, you reveal it, and then your opponent has a Mirror Jade. It kind of forces them to think in the sense that, should I banish this now? And more often than not, they do choose to do that just because they fear the bounce, right? But then you send it away using this, it effectively gets rid of the banish on board and forces them to kind of go into their Chimera play earlier than they want to get Mirror Jade back online for another banish. So pretty good, and it does force plays. It almost got me out of a tough rut, but unfortunately the opponent had a face down droplet and it kind of stopped my momentum from there. All right, and the last several spells, droplet. This card is nuts. A lot of the format now, opposed differently from the last format, is because last format things were set up in a way where droplet wasn't necessarily viable, whether it be through Herald of Arclight or just getting rid of so many cards in hand to the point where this deck isn't playable at all. So last format I didn't play this, but this format, it's very isocentric to very specific cards, i.e. Mirror Jade, Herald of Perfection, if you do see that, things of that nature, where it's more specific rather than a whole board of fat negate. So I decided to main deck this, and it was in the side, but I really wanted to see this in the main deck. Say I went again with that Flunder matchup, or I went second against Despia, things of that nature. So I think the card was really good. And for the last of the spells, we played the 3. 2 Desires. Because it's at 2, we played at 2, no questions asked. Call By was something that I considered not playing, weirdly enough. Really good against the Despia matchup, 100%. Hits hand traps if they're trying to stop you. But in previous formats, Swordsoul never played this card, and the reason why is because we didn't need to. Ordinarily, we could just power through if they got through if we got hand trapped or anything like that. However, I've left it in just because now in the current format, it hits so many things. I thought it was definitely viable. All right, so that's all the spells. And the last card I just didn't reveal, along with Imperm, it's just the 1 blackout. This card's super cool. I side it out literally every single time I go second. Do I miss it going second at times? 100%. But I'd rather put in other cards, and I'd rather see other cards than drawing this card. Drawing this card going second can be really bad, so I just opt not to. So that's the main deck there. As I mentioned before, the main deck count is at 44. I wouldn't necessarily change anything aside from Effect Veiler going to DD Crow. Deck count was fine. The ratio, the math on drawing a starter, drawing a hand trap, all good. Starter potential was, I think, 80% that I would see a starting play in my hand, with like a 60% chance of seeing extender. Hand trap ratio was 80%, I'd see at least one. I think 45, 48%, I would see two. I'm more than happy with those numbers. And I wouldn't necessarily change anything for the time being, as long as this meta stays the way it is. Another thing I forgot to mention is Droplet is also in the main, just because while testing online, I saw way too many Scythe combos still mucking around. And I don't know why Konami didn't opt to hit Scythe. I'm sure they had their reasonings for it. Being like, Anaconda's gone, the DPE play, popping Scythe, the most common line is gone. However, the Menace is still out there, and it was prevalent today in the field, not only against me, but my buddies who played in the regionals as well. All right, so we'll go over to the extra deck. Extra deck is pretty standard, pretty much the same as the main deck in regards to that. So for level 10s, we play the Sinister Long One, the Chenying, and the Baron. I go with the mindset, I don't know how popular this is, but I don't see people going for this as often as I feel they should. I disrespect Nib a lot, so I always go for Sinister Long One a lot if I acknowledge that maybe they don't have a hand trap. Or even if I have the extender in hand, say the Dragon Circle, right? Regardless of whatever it is, if I feel they don't have it, or I feel like I baited it enough to the point where I don't believe they have it anymore, Sinister Long One's great, because eventually you're going +3, right? Chain 1 this, Moye 2, Chi Zhao 3. You'll get your Blackout or whatever card you need from Chi Zhao, and then essentially you're drawing 2 cards in an attempt to draw maybe a hand trap, maybe Blackout if you didn't get it, or maybe a side deck card, right? It is more iffy going second, but I've noticed in the current format, not as many people side Nib, so I'm not too worried about it, right? Baron, again, if I have the suspect that they have a hand trap, or if if I draw a bunch of my side deck cards and I want to protect them, Baron is a safe way to go about it too. Chenying pushes for game. Funny enough, in matchups where you're playing like Agnister, for example, he gets so beefy to the point where he can actually just hit into a rival. I personally haven't done it in person. I've done it online. But yeah, so he's obviously very good, so I left him in there for sure. This is pretty standard. The 1 level 9 Chaofeng. People say they don't make this a lot, but I feel like in the mirror this card's so deadly, right? So if I see my Vessel line, 100%, I'm going Chaofeng every time. I'll sit on it. If I try to go for, let's say, go Amoy and they imperm that, I have no issues just sitting on this and like whatever miscellaneous hand trap, or even my going second cards, because they can't really extend past any plays, maybe except for their long one. So just playing it off the math in my head, I'm not too scared of that, and often than not, you're pretty much eliminating the cards that they could possibly have in hand, right? So Veiler, Nib, Gamma, if they play it, you're basically limiting the applicable cards that they can side or they can play against you. So I like it a lot, and the effect where it leaves the field, you can add a tuner. I typically grab Ecclesia unless I know they're going to keep popping off, then I'll grab like an Ash or a Veiler or something like that. The level 8s, 2 Chi Zhao, very standard. This card's crazy. I typically, if I'm going second, I don't opt necessarily to go for this first. I usually go Baxia and then get rid of whatever things I need to do. Then go Chi Zhao, grab the long one, go from there. I think a lot of people make the mistake where they rush into Chi Zhao just because they can. and at times, in the moment, they don't get punished for it, but in the long run, it may have been more beneficial to get rid of cards in hand, push for damage, and go from there. So I would always save Chijia if I can. If I can go for Baxia, I'll go for Baxia, if need be, of course. The one Draco Berserker, you know, when you're locked into Tenyis, it's just a thing that you can do. There are times where, you know, you can go, if you go into Worm specifically, or you go Shaman, summon back either the Moe or the Taiye, you go into this, it still has its effect because it is a Tenyi card, and you go from there. So it's not bad in practice. Dragite, I opted for this guy because, you know, Branded Despia is a thing. Spell cards have never been more prevalent in our metagame than right now, so the ability to negate a spell or trap is great. I did get bitten in the ass summoning this one time, actually, and I'll explain in a little bit after. The 2 Baxia, while I don't think it's mandatory to play through, I think it's right to play 2. Sometimes when you're going second, sometimes you can even go into 2 Baxia to just continuously remove their stuff. And I find myself doing that a lot, and I think 2 is correct. If you don't play 2, I understand, but for my playstyle personally and how I attempt to break boards, I think 2 is absolutely correct. Yazi, very good card. I summoned him a couple times today. I summon him at times, or I have him as a backup in case I think they have maybe like Token Collector in hand. If I have Adara, I'll special summon him first, and I'll go long one, pitch card, summon him. If they have Token Collector, it only makes sense to do it then. In which case I would go for a Yazi, pop it, and then carry on with my play. That's how I would go about doing that. So I think Yazi is a very good card in that regard. Going second as well is just, it can be the nuts. The 1 Shaman. I don't know how I feel about this card. It actually won me a game, so funny enough, I'm glad I had it in there, but I don't know how I feel about it, right? There are times where I feel like that slot could be more utilized towards like a more versatile Synchro 8, whether it be like Omega, whether it be Crimson Blade, or whatever the case may be. I feel like it may be better used in that regard, but I'm not disappointed in how it performed, and I acknowledge that it can be life-saving at times when you just need to, you know, revive maybe your Tai or your Moe to keep playing on, or prevent your opponent from doing anything if they already are bleeding dry. And lastly, it's a necessity. You play 3 Monk. There are games where it does come up. I think this weekend, which was 7 rounds, I summoned 3 Monks, maybe 2-3 times, and I'm glad every single time that I did have 3. I would never play 2 if Hulk was a thing. Sure, I would play 2, but because the Hulk line with Auroradon isn't a thing, it only makes sense in my opinion to play 3. So yeah, 4 links followed by 11 synchros. And lastly, the side deck. So this was the most highly contested thing for me all weekend. I net decked so much, and I was playing against so many different decks, and I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to see. I haven't made it clear yet, but this has been my first physical regionals. I did a remote regionals a couple months ago where I got top 16. This time around, I ended up 5th, so top 8. Very proud of myself, especially the way how I started the tournament, which was 1 loss, 1 draw. And I was going to drop, but I stayed in, and we rode the momentum and took a 5-game winning streak to end up top 5. So I was very proud of myself for that. And when we go over the matchups, I'll explain what happened there. So the side deck here, I think for the side deck, I may change a couple things, but the way it performed, I'm not upset at all this weekend. So first, 3 Nib. Oftentimes when I side for the types of decks that I'm anticipating on seeing. So in my side, I was prepared for the control matchup. I was prepared for the Despia matchup. However, I wasn't prepared for any combo matchup, and I was worried that I was underestimating the amount of combo that was going to show up. So at the bare minimum, I decided to offer 3 Nibiru. I sided this in 3 times. I sided it against Salamangreat, Phantom Knight, and Swordsoul. So three matches I decided to side this in. Unfortunately, it never came up. I drew it, and at the time, the Salaman great player, he just didn't go summon 5 times, and yeah, it didn't come into use. But I acknowledge that it still would have been a really good card, and it was the correct play to have it sided in. Next is Streak and Twister. I opted for this over that of Lightning Storm or Cosmic Cyclone, just because in this format I imagine that there's always at least 2 cards I want to hit, right? And I would always like to take 2 over 1. Sure, I understand Cosmic plays around like the Heavenly Prison guy who protects your back row from being destroyed. Sure, I understand that. But in that matchup, while I should be worried, I'm not as worried as I should be, I guess. So I opted for this, and you know, against Flunder, Lightning Storm is not good because they can just shotgun in the start of main phase or in response to your Lightning Storm. So I wholeheartedly acknowledge that. So I think Twin Twisters was the correct play for me this weekend, and it worked out. My matchup against Sky Striker, I saw that I turfed the 2 back row, and effectively I had game from there. Now we're going on for the traps. Oh, I forgot, I didn't take out my remaining spells, but I had 1 Change of Heart because I wanted to test it, and it's just such a cool card. The fact that it came off the ban list, I wanted to give it a try. And Harpy's Feather Duster against those heavy back row decks. It's just a good power 1-up to see. For the traps, I have 3-dimensional barrier. Originally this was Rivalry, but I acknowledge it doesn't do anything against the mirror, so I didn't opt for it. And Dimensional Barrier is just way more diverse in the sense that it hits Despia, it hits Swordsoul, it can hit Drytron, things like that. So I thought this was better than Rivalry, even though Rivalry is a continuous trap and it lingers. I think this was more impactful, and it helped me go for game when I did see it. I didn't see it, but it would have. Anti-Spell. This card is really good. Usually when I'm playing against Despia, I'll side it in every single time I go second, and start a draw phase, I'll shotgun it. Sure, they can go branded opening. I'll let them do it. I'm not too worried because I'm just not worried, right? Sure, if they have Super Poly, they have Super Poly, but there's only so much they can do. So again, I'm not worried about it at all. And lastly, Red Reboot. This card is super good. I drew it twice, didn't need to use it twice. Both times the opponent opted for less of a control board, and I was able to break it without using this. It was there just in case they decided to flip back row, but I was able to play through it no matter what anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. So it's a 15 card side deck. Again, I forgot to take out the Change of Heart and Harpy's Feather Duster out of the binder, but that's what I did play this weekend. Right. So as I mentioned, I finished top 5. I just missed the top 4 cut. The people in front of me were X1. I finished X11. And yeah, it just goes back to the first couple losses in the morning. It took me like 2 hours to get to locals. I was already shaken up as is. First physical locals, got there, and yeah, I don't think the nerves got to me, but I guess just beginner's bad luck, I suppose. So how it ended up playing out was round 1, I played Branded Despia. The guy I played with, he finished top 4, so I'm not too salty about how that went. Game 1, he set up a pretty standard Despia board with the Mirror Jade, with the Ad Libdom in hand, Branded Red set, another miscellaneous card set. Didn't know what that was, and we played through it all the way to the end, where I normal summoned the Moye after expending all of his negates or interruptions, only for the face down card to be Forbidden Droplet, and we couldn't push beyond that. I believe it was like 4 interruptions. We played through it all the way to there, and the 5th was the one that got me. Game 2, I opened the nuts. I finished. I ended on Sinister Long One, Chi Zhao, Blackout set, Imperm set, anti-spell set, Valor in hand, Ash in hand. There's no way he was going to play through it. He scooped pretty much as soon as he saw anti-spell flip, so that was that. And then game 3, I pushed as much as I could. I broke pretty much the board at that point. We were gonna go, like, I used the Tenyis just to maneuver all the way around all his interruptions, and then when I was gonna go into my Swordsoul play, I summoned the token. He went D barrier, I give up. There's just nothing I can do there because he had the follow-up, Albion Engrave, and yeah, I knew the writing was on the wall at that point, so I gave it up quick. So, you know, I went 1-2 there. Match 2, I played another branded Despia. Oh, first match I lost the dice roll, if it hasn't been clear. Second match I also lost the dice roll. And I think this is a game where my inexperience got to me. I was playing a guy, and you know, I wasn't faced towards the clock. He was, so I had a very high lack of perception of my surroundings and time. So game 1 happens. The board he sets up is pretty lackluster. My hand is pretty good. I had like a Moye, a Vishuda, a Desires, an Ash, and then another card. And basically I used the Vishuda. Oh yeah, I had Circle, so I used the Vishuda to bait out the negate. And then I just needed to go. I went Desires. I just needed to draw a worm, just to make the hand playable. And I just could not for the life of me draw a worm. I drew like droplets and another card, so it made it really awkward. I played it all the way to the end, but eventually he just outgrinded me. I just had lack of resources. I went double Desires, banished pretty much everything. I banished the cards, the power 1-ofs that would have made my hand playable, like Shithana and Blackout. But yeah, I just chalked it up to bad luck. So it was a bad start for me, and it wasn't playable. Game 2. This is where time was called, and this is the time where Dragite kind of bit me in the butt. I went. He had Quertus on board and Chimera, right? He already had spent Chimera's effect, so he had Quertus, and he had Quertus negate my my Dragite. So I went Sinister Long One, forgetting the fact that Dragite has 0 attack. I went Sinister Long One, not Sinister Long One, sorry. I went to Long One into Chen Ying, and I used 2 Desires again at this point. So Chen Ying was really big, and I was gonna hit for game because basically Chimera's like 400 attack, and like Quertus was like 200 or something. But then I completely forgot about the fact that it's still 0 attack, so I fudged that. And then on the next turn, he went Super Poly, synced my 2 card, fused my 2 cards off from Mud Dragon of the Swamp, which I thought was insane. But either way, I was able to come back, summoning the Tenyis from hand and from the using Ashuna in the grave to make Berserker and just push hard. So I won the second game just in the nick of time, but then time was called, and you know, I feel bad about it, but there's nothing I could have done there. So I went tie. Not gonna lie, I was thinking of going home at this point just because I didn't see a point of carrying on. It was very disheartening just because I felt like my losses were chalked up to bad luck, but I persevered on because I made the 2-hour trip out, so I was like, screw it, I'll play it on. So then match 3, we ended up playing Salad. I 2-0'd him pretty swiftly. The match itself was nothing to write about. I just overpowered his deck. If he tried to start a play, I went first. He tried to start a play, I just went Sinister Long One, banished his stuff, and he just couldn't go carry on. And then game 2, he just didn't set up a very oppressive board, and I was able to break it. So at this point, I was 1-1-1. Then round 4 happened. Round 4, I ended up playing a local guy at my locals. He played Branded Despia. I won the dice roll here, and again it was a quick 2-0. And in game 1, I took it pretty decidedly. He just didn't have a play starter. And then game 2, he actually opted to make me go first, and he drew his board breakers, but he didn't draw a starter. So that was that. So at this point, I was 2-1-1. After that, I played Brave Phantom Knight. I lost the dice roll. He went. Oddly enough, he just passed it over to me. So I wasn't sure if he drew like sheer hand trap or just the fact that he drew brick. So I played it very carefully. I just went for Baron Chijiao just because I could have went further, but I didn't want to risk the fact that he had Nib. So I went that, and the next turn where he only had 1,000 life points left, he just scooped it up and gave it back to me. So there was that. And then game 2, he reveals that he's on Phantom Knight, Brave Phantom Knight. Sets up full Phantom Knight board, and I could have broken it if I had just drawn into Droplet or Imperm for that matter, because the way he did it, he shotgunned Scythe in the main phase right after I went Desire. So if my Desires had resolved and I drew Imperm, could have hit the Scythe because I had another Imperm in hand, and he had Griffin set up. So I needed 2, or I needed Droplets. I didn't draw either, unfortunately. Game 3, I disrespected Nib. I anticipated that he didn't have it, or I just expected. I just played like he didn't. Right. So I went Sinister Long One. I went Chijiao. I had Blackout set. I had Imperm set. I had Ash in hand, and I had Follow Up in hand as well. He pretty much he tried to play through it, but yeah, the board was just too nasty. You couldn't play through it, right? So at that point, I was then 3-1. It was looking real good. Next round, this was round 6. Yeah, round 6. I played Sky Striker. He won the dice roll. Oh, sorry, I won the dice roll. Yes, I won the dice roll. I went standard Swordsoul play. Where I went, actually I went through the Vessel line. So I went Vessel into Chao Feng, into Chijiao, into Sinister Long One, with Blackout set, and then he reveals that he's on Striker. He tries to go for his play. I negate with Chijiao. He tries to set 2. I went Blackout pop, Chao Feng pop acro, and the writing was on the wall at that point. Game 2. He goes first. I was suspecting that he might have. So either way, I was going to put in Twin Twister, Harpies, and Reboot, just in case, because I know Striker these days are going to put Floodgates in there. So whether he went first or second, I was prepared for that, and lo and behold, he went first. The side deck cards he reveals to me that he put in were Dimensional Barrier, which would have been real bad, and Summon Limit. So he ended up drawing the Summon Limit, setting Summon Limit, setting what I imagine was Widow Anchor, and ending on Shiz adding Engage. He had DD Crow in hand. So I went typical line of play. I was seeing if I could bait the negate. If it was like there can only be one, I would be in trouble. So I was just gonna wait for him to spring it on me. But at this point, I had gone into Long One first. Summoned the token. He went Summon Limit. I went Twin Twister and then carried on and pretty much eradicated his board at that point. So that was pretty quick as well, 2-0. So at this point, looking real good, 4-1-1. I was moving up the tables. At this point, I believe I was just sitting at the edge, right outside of top 8. So I knew the next one, if I won, it would get me in there. So I was anticipating that, and you know, my friend from locals who had started off the day very well, I think it was like 4-0. He encountered a couple rough matchups where he ended up going 1 draw, 1 loss. So I knew the possibility of us facing off was a thing, and it turned out to be that way. So we played off in the final round, the 7th round, and it was the mirror match. He won the dice roll. He played out his hand, and he finished on a Chen Ying, Chijiao, and I believe that was, and then a couple hand cards in hand. I think he needed the follow-up, or he believed the follow-up was important, so he had like the tie in hand or something like that. So the way I played it was I had Chithana in hand, actually, so I special Chithana. Didn't do anything. He didn't do anything there. Obviously, he couldn't. So then I went Monk, battle phase. Monk, crash into Chijiao, activate Chithana effect, sending Chijiao out. Right? He could have, I guess, Chen-Yinged, but there would have been no point really. So he was saving it. So the immediate next follow-up play, I went Tenyi line, went into Boxia spin. I didn't use Boxia to summon back anything yet. And then I went Moye effect, grab stuff, go long one, and then go into Sinister long one, went into Chi Zhao, and then I used the Monk remaining on board. I used Boxy effect to pop that, and then summon back the Adaro I used off of the Vessel line, and it ended on 3, and then a blackout set. So effectively, I knew I had that game in the bag. Game 2 came around. I anticipated his side deck to be very similar to mine, not only because he's a great player and he probably would be siding the cards that are most relevant against my deck, ergo being Dimensional Barrier, maybe Anti-Spell. So I did put in Duster and Red Reboot, I just anticipated it. I also put in Change of Heart just because I think it would be kind of funny, and we went for it. So then game 1, he goes Desires first, draws his cards, and this was the riskiest play I've done throughout the tournament. He goes Moye with 6 cards in hand and reveals long one. So if he has an extender, I effectively lose because my hand was Imperm, Desires, triple Ashina. So I figured I was gonna lose anyways if I didn't stop this, so I went for it. I Imperm the Moye, and lo and behold, he doesn't have follow-up, and he sets 2 cards in the back row. So my turn comes around. I drew Desires, and he flips Anti-Spell. So effectively, 2 of my cards in my hand are dead. Can't do anything with them. So my fear now is I can't bounce this Moye back and go for damage, because if I do, I'm playing into his long one and I'm playing into his Moye. There's no point. So I went into Ashina, went Monk, Ashina, summon Shitana, link off for Monk, attack with one of the monks, destroying my Monk, summoning him back with Shitana popping his Moye, doing 2,000 damage. I set Imperm, and I have Ashen. No, I don't have Ashen. I set Imperm and I pass. Next turn comes around, he must have drawn like a brick or something like that, so he just passes as is, and he sets another card. So at this point, I'm anticipating the fact that he probably has Dimensional Barrier set. There's no other way he would set another trap. I don't anticipate him setting like another Imperm, or even if he had an Imperm. I just assumed the worst, right? So I had 2 monks on board, and my mindset was, if he does, I'm gonna try to push for as much damage as possible. So I special summon Ashina, go into my 3rd monk, summon the Vishuddha from hand I drew off of Desires, and then long one, pitch, and then it's summoned Token, right? So that was the idea, where I pushed for as much damage as possible, and lo and behold, yeah, he flips Dimensional Barrier on me, and yeah, so I'm glad I went that way about it. So at that point, I had enough damage to push for game, and even if I didn't, I would have Shaman I could make and push for it that way. So it sucks beating my friend to push myself to top 8, but you know, that's how the cookie crumbles sometimes, and I'm super proud of myself for coming back from 1-1. And yeah, you know, I have this beautiful mat to show for it. I wish I had the deck box too, but it is what it is. And yeah, that was my first regionals experience, and it was an excellent one, hosted by the side deck, and I look forward to other in-person events. I picked up this game during COVID, so you know, it feels real good to actually play with people in person. So yeah, that's all I have. Thanks for listening, and I hope you guys learned one thing or another. All right, that's it.